Station Vanguard orbited the gas giant Helix Prime like a metallic moon with delusions of grandeur. The massive structure housed the Terran Galactic Defense Academy, where the galaxy's finest military minds came to either forge legends or break recruits, sometimes both on the same Tuesday. The Academy had been humanity's idea, naturally, because humans had this adorable habit of trying to unite everyone under one big, happy, militaristic umbrella. Most species found this endearing in the way one finds a small child's attempt to lift a starship endearing, cute, but ultimately destined for disappointment. The Academy's training decks buzzed with activity as various species attempted to prove their martial prowess. Kytherian scouts with their forearms juggled plasma rifles like party tricks. Gorvani heavy infantry, built like walking tanks, casually bench-pressed equipment that could crush lesser beings. Zalthine speedsters blurred between obstacles faster than most species could blink. And then there were the humans. Oh, the humans. They stood there in their neat little formations, looking for all the galaxy like they'd gotten lost on their way to a poetry reading. Pink and soft and concerningly fragile, they represented Earth's contribution to galactic defense with all the intimidation factor of a basket of kittens. The other species had learned to work around them, the way one might work around a particularly delicate piece of furniture that someone's grandmother had insisted on including in the decor. Drill Sergeant Korthak Vex observed this menagerie with a kind of professional disdain that came from 20 years of military service. A Zorillian by birth and a perfectionist by choice, Vex possessed natural armor plating that could deflect small arms fire and muscles that could bend titanium. His species had evolved on a world where everything tried to kill you, including the plants, which had given Zorillians a casual relationship with violence that other species found either impressive or deeply disturbing. Another batch of softshells, Vex muttered to his assistant, Instructor Thek, whose Mandalorian heritage made him nearly as formidable as Vex himself. Look at them. The Kytherians at least have redundant limbs. The Gorvani are properly armored. Even the Zalthines can run away effectively. But these humans. He gestured toward the human contingent with one massive, clawed hand. 23 human recruits stood at attention, their pale faces earnest with determination. They looked like they'd been assembled from spare parts and good intentions. Instructor Vex, came a crisp voice from behind him. The human contingent is ready for combat assessment. Vex turned to see Corporal Riley Chen, the human squad leader, standing at perfect attention. She was smaller than most of her squad mates, with dark hair pulled back in regulation style and eyes that held more intelligence than Vex generally expected from humans. Still, intelligence and 50 credits might buy you a cup of calf, but it wouldn't stop a Gorvani charge or deflect a plasma bolt. Ah, Corporal Chen, Vex said, his voice carrying the particular tone drill sergeants reserved for explaining why recruits were about to suffer. How delightfully punctual. Tell me, have you prepared your squad for today's exercises? Yes, sir. All personnel are ready for combat drills. Combat drills, Vex repeated, savoring the words. How optimistic. Tell me, Corporal, what exactly do humans contribute to a galactic military force? Your people can't take much damage. You're not particularly fast. Your strength is laughable compared to proper warrior species. Riley's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sir, humans bring tactical flexibility, problem-solving capabilities, and excuses, Vex interrupted. Always excuses. We're tactical. We're adaptable. We think outside the box. Do you know what the Gorvani call thinking outside the box? Weakness. Do you know what the Kytherians call tactical flexibility? An inability to commit to a proper strategy. The other species recruits had gathered to watch this exchange, sensing the entertainment value of watching their drill sergeant dismantle human pretensions. A few Gorvani chuckled with sounds like grinding stone. The Kytherians chittered among themselves in their harmonic language. Today, Vex announced, raising his voice to address the entire assembly, we're going to conduct a demonstration. Something to illustrate the vast gulf between actual warrior species and... He gestured vaguely at the humans. Whatever these are. The training deck fell silent except for the hum of gravity generators and life support systems. Even the usually chattering Zalthines had stopped their rapid-fire conversations to watch. Physical conditioning first, Vex declared. Standard Endurance Course. Let's see how long our softshell friends last. The endurance course at the Academy had been designed by committee, which meant it incorporated the sadistic preferences of multiple species. Gorvani obstacle climbing, Kytherian balance challenges, Zalthine speed sections, and various other tributes to martial suffering stretched across 3 levels of the training deck. The non-human recruits attacked the course with enthusiasm. Gorvani recruits smashed through barriers that were meant to be climbed over. Kytherians used their multiple limbs to navigate obstacles with fluid grace. Zalthines completed sections so quickly they had to wait for the rest of the course to catch up. The humans tried. They climbed where they should have smashed, balanced where they should have powered through, and took a methodical approach to challenges that other species solved through raw capability. They finished, eventually, but with the kind of times that made Vex shake his armored head in professional disappointment. 17 minutes for the full course, Vex announced as the last human struggled over the final barrier. Respectable, if this were a retirement community's fitness program. The Gorvani average was 8 minutes. The Kytherians managed 7. Even the Zalthines, bless their hyperactive little hearts, finished in under 6. Riley stepped forward, her breathing heavy but controlled. So, the course wasn't designed for human physiology. Our approach was inadequate, Vex finished. But please, enlighten us. What's the human excuse this time? We don't make excuses, so we adapt. Adapt, Vex repeated, and several aliens made sounds that might have been laughter in their respective languages. Yes, I'm sure adaptation will serve you well when a Korthak raiding party boards your ship. Please wait while we adapt to your combat style, you'll say, and I'm sure they'll be very understanding. The other recruits were openly amused now. This was better than the Academy's entertainment broadcasts, watching the drill sergeant systematically destroy human military pretensions with surgical precision. Sir, Riley said, her voice remaining level despite the growing humiliation. Humans have successfully integrated into galactic military forces for 3 years now. Our performance records show that humans work very hard to achieve mediocre results, Vex interrupted. Which brings us to today's main event, hand-to-hand combat assessment. A collective intake of breath swept through the assembled recruits. Hand-to-hand combat was where species differences became most apparent, where natural advantages couldn't be overcome by tactics or technology. It was pure biology expressing itself through violence. Now, I know what you're thinking, Vex continued, beginning to pace in front of the human formation. Surely Drill Sergeant Vex won't ask delicate human recruits to engage in actual combat with species that evolved from predators. That would be cruel. He stopped pacing and faced Riley directly. You're absolutely right. It would be cruel. To the other species. Having to hold back, to restrain their natural capabilities, to pretend that humans represent an actual threat rather than an amusing distraction. So instead, I'll demonstrate proper defensive techniques myself, using our Corporal Chen as an assistant. Riley's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her composed facade. Around the training deck, other recruits shifted with anticipation. Everyone knew Vex's reputation. He'd once arm wrestled a Gorvani heavy and won. He'd outrun Zalthine scouts in full gear. He'd taken blaster fire without flinching and kept fighting. Sir, Riley began, I don't think. Thinking is your first mistake, Corporal, Vex said, moving to the center of the mat. Military action requires instinct, reaction, the kind of split-second responses that separate warriors from casualties. Humans overthink everything. Always analyzing, always hesitating, always looking for the gentle solution. He gestured for her to join him on the combat mat. Come now, Corporal. This is just a demonstration. I'll show the proper way to defend against an opponent's attack, and you'll provide a suitably non-threatening offensive action. Think of it as educational theater. Riley stepped onto the mat, her movements careful and controlled. She was smaller than Vex by a considerable margin. He stood nearly 2 meters tall and massed probably twice what she did. The size difference drew chuckles from the Gorvani contingent. The key to defensive fighting, Vex announced to his audience, is understanding your opponent's capabilities and limitations. For instance, humans have weak bone density, limited muscle mass, and reflexes that couldn't catch a sleeping Thraxian slug. More laughter from the assembled recruits. So when facing a human opponent, one can afford to be casual in one's defensive preparations. He turned to Riley with what might have been a smile on his armored features. Whenever you're ready, Corporal. A simple attack will suffice. Perhaps a gentle push? A stern expression? I want to demonstrate proper defensive positioning. What happened next took approximately 1.7 seconds, according to the Academy's training census, though witnesses would argue about the exact sequence of events for years afterward. Riley, interpreting Vex's instruction as permission to begin, stepped forward with what she intended as a controlled, demonstration-appropriate strike toward his center mass. It was a kind of movement she'd practiced thousands of times in training, measured, precise, designed to illustrate technique rather than cause damage. Vex, confident in his superiority and expecting the kind of tentative, easily deflected attack that humans typically produced, began a casual defensive movement designed more for dramatic effect than actual protection. What Vex had failed to account for, what none of the instructors had thought to mention, because why would they, was that human urology operated on a somewhat different basis than most species. While Zorillians and Gorvani and most other warrior races had evolved with natural armor and redundant organ systems, humans had evolved with something else entirely, a neurochemical panic button that could temporarily override their normal physical limitations. Riley's brain, interpreting the situation as an actual combat scenario rather than a demonstration, decided that her life was in danger. In the space of a single heartbeat, her adrenal glands dumped enough epinephrine into her system to power a small shuttlecraft. Her muscles, normally restricted by neural safety limits designed to prevent self-injury, suddenly had access to their full contractile potential. The gentle demonstration strike that left Riley's hand was traveling at roughly the same velocity as a Kytherian warhammer. Vex's casual defensive posture proved inadequate. The impact drove him backward 3 meters and deposited him on the deck with a sound like a cargo container hitting a bulkhead. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling with the expression of someone who had just received a profound and unwelcome education in comparative xenobiology. The training deck fell silent except for the sound of Vex trying to breathe with what turned out to be 3 cracked ribs and a dislocated shoulder. Riley stood frozen in her follow-through position, staring at her own hand as if it had betrayed her. Around the deck, 24 alien recruits made the kind of silence that suggested profound philosophical reconsideration was taking place. "Oh," Riley said in a small voice. "Oh no." Medical personnel arrived with a kind of efficiency that suggested violent training accidents were not uncommon at the Academy. They swarmed over Vex with scanners and regenerative injectors while Academy Commander Torval, a Delaxian whose species had long ago decided that bureaucracy was safer than warfare, investigated the situation with the thoroughness of someone who would eventually have to explain this to his superiors. "Let me understand this correctly," Commander Torval said, reviewing the sensor data for the 3rd time. Corporal Chen struck Drill Sergeant Vex with approximately 4,000 pounds of force per square inch. "Yes, sir," the medical officer confirmed. "The impact fractured 3 ribs and caused significant soft tissue damage. If Instructor Vex hadn't been Zorillian, the injury would likely have been fatal." Torval looked at Riley, who had been standing at attention for the past hour while medical personnel worked on her victim. She looked pale and shaky, probably from the adrenaline crash. "Corporal, how exactly did you generate that much kinetic energy?" I don't know, sir. It was supposed to be a light demonstration strike. I just reacted." "Reacted," Torval repeated. He pulled up Riley's service record on his datapad, scrolling through her previous performance evaluations. "Your hand-to-hand combat scores have been consistently average. No indication of exceptional strength or speed." "No, sir. This has never happened before." From across the medical bay, Vex's voice carried over despite the pain medication. "Commander, request permission to speak." "Granted, Instructor." Vex struggled to sit up, his armored torso now decorated with medical sensors and therapeutic patches. "Sir, I believe I may have misunderstood human physiology." Several people in the medical bay made sounds that might have been suppressed laughter. "How so, Instructor?" "Well, so, I assumed that human physical capabilities were consistent. that their demonstrated performance in training represented their actual capabilities. Vex paused to let the medical officer adjust something that was probably painful. I may have been incorrect in that assumption. Over the next several hours, Academy medical personnel conducted a thorough investigation of human physiology that probably should have been completed before accepting human recruits. What they discovered was both fascinating and mildly terrifying. Humans, it turned out, operated under normal circumstances at roughly 30% of their actual physical capacity. Their brains actively suppressed their muscle strength to prevent self-injury, because human bones and joints weren't designed to handle the full contractile force of human muscles. Under extreme stress, however, those neural limiters could be temporarily overridden, allowing humans to access strength levels that most species would consider impossible for their body mass. Dr. Kelvish, the Academy's xenobiology specialist, presented his findings to a hastily convened meeting of senior staff. Essentially, he explained, humans have evolved a biological override system. In life or death situations, their bodies can temporarily exceed safe operational parameters to ensure survival. And the side effects? Commander Torval asked. Significant. Muscle damage, joint strain, potential bone fractures. Humans who use this emergency strength typically injure themselves in the process. It's a last resort survival mechanism, not a combat technique. But Corporal Chen shows no signs of injury, because she only used a fraction of her potential maximum output. If she had been genuinely terrified for her life, the results would have been. Dr. Kelvish paused to consult his calculations. Considerably more dramatic. In the days that followed, the Academy quietly revised its training protocols for human recruits. The casual mockery that had characterized human treatment was replaced by a kind of wary respect. Other species recruits stopped treating humans like delicate ornaments and started treating them like bombs with very long fuses. Riley found herself in the uncomfortable position of being famous for something she'd never intended to do. Other human recruits looked at her with a mixture of pride and concern. The alien recruits gave her a wider berth and spoke to her with the kind of careful politeness normally reserved for dangerous explosives. 2 weeks later, Vex returned to active duty with his ribs properly healed and his understanding of human capability significantly revised. His first action was to call Riley to his office for a private conversation. "Corporal Chen," he said, gesturing for her to sit across from his desk. "I owe you an apology." Riley blinked. "So, I made assumptions about your species based on incomplete information. I mocked capabilities I didn't understand and dismissed potential I couldn't recognize." He leaned back in his chair, a movement that still caused him some discomfort. That was unprofessional and, as it turned out, dangerous. "So, I never meant to hurt you. It was an accident." "Was it?" Vex interrupted. "Or was it exactly what happens when someone pushes a human too far and assumes they'll respond like every other species?" Riley considered this. "I honestly don't know, so I just reacted." "Yes, you did. And that reaction probably saved both our lives." "So." Vex activated his desk display, showing combat footage from recent skirmishes along the Galactic Rim. "Korthak Raiders, Corporal. They've been testing our defenses, probing for weaknesses. They are particularly interested in human crewed vessels because they assume humans are easy targets." The footage showed Korthak boarding parties overwhelming ship security with brutal efficiency. They were larger than most species, heavily armored, and utterly ruthless. "Now imagine," Vex continued, "what happens when those raiders encounter humans who have been properly trained to access their emergency capabilities. Imagine their surprise when the soft species they are expecting to intimidate suddenly demonstrates the ability to punch through armor plating." Riley studied the footage with growing understanding. "You think humans have been underutilized?" "I think humans have been underestimating themselves," Vex corrected. "And I helped perpetuate that underestimation. No more." The Academy's approach to human training changed dramatically. Instead of trying to make humans perform like other species, instructors began developing techniques that leveraged uniquely human capabilities. Stress response training, controlled adrenaline management, and what the medical staff euphemistically called emergency strength conditioning. Riley became an unofficial test pilot for these new training protocols, working with Dr. Kelvish to understand the limits and applications of human physiological responses. They discovered that with proper preparation and training, humans could learn to partially access their emergency strength without causing self-injury, though it remained a technique requiring extreme caution. 6 months later, the Academy's first all-human Special Operations Unit graduated with honors. They called themselves the Terran Emergency Response Division, though everyone else referred to them by their unofficial nickname, the Soft Hammers. The galaxy's attitude toward humanity began to shift. What had once been seen as charming naivety was reconsidered as dangerous unpredictability. Species that had dismissed humans as ineffective began to wonder what other capabilities they might have overlooked. Vex found himself in the unique position of being the drill sergeant who had discovered human combat potential through the simple expedient of getting his ribs broken. He wore the distinction with a mixture of pride and lingering embarrassment, and his training methods became considerably more respectful of species differences. On a Tuesday morning exactly 1 year after the infamous incident, Vex stood before a new group of mixed-species recruits. The composition was familiar: Gorvani heavy infantry, Kytherian scouts, Zalthine speedsters, and a contingent of human recruits. But this time, when he addressed the humans, his tone carried none of his previous dismissive mockery. "Human recruits," he announced, "you will be training under special protocols designed for your unique physiological characteristics. You will be expected to maintain the same standards as all other species, with techniques adapted to your capabilities." One of the Gorvani recruits, a particularly large individual with scars indicating previous combat experience, made a sound that might have been a chuckle. "Special treatment for the soft ones." Vex turned to regard the Gorvani with the kind of attention that made smart recruits remember they had somewhere else to be. "Recruit Korthak, isn't it?" "Yes, sir." "Tell me, Recruit Korthak, how much do you know about human emergency physiology?" The Gorvani's scarred features showed confusion. "Sir, would you care to volunteer for a demonstration? I'm sure our human recruits would be happy to show you some of their special techniques." The human recruits exchanged glances that held considerably more confidence than their predecessors had shown a year earlier. Recruit Korthak, demonstrating the survival instincts that had gotten him this far in life, suddenly found his interest in mocking humans had mysteriously evaporated. "No, sir," he said quickly. "I'm sure that won't be necessary." "Wise choice," Vex said, and his tone suggested he was remembering the feeling of trying to breathe with cracked ribs. "Now then, shall we begin with basic conditioning? I think you'll find this year's training enlightening." As the recruits dispersed to their various training stations, Vex remained on the observation deck, watching the humans prepare for their exercises with what could only be described as professional wariness. They moved with the same careful precision they always had, but now everyone understood what that precision was restraining. The galaxy had learned an important lesson about assumptions, delivered with the kind of educational impact that only a shattered ribcage could provide. Humans might still look soft and harmless, might still prefer diplomacy to violence, might still approach problems with annoying rationality rather than proper warrior instincts. But they were soft the way a coiled spring was soft, harmless the way a sleeping predator was harmless, and rational the way a carefully planned ambush was rational. The galaxy's warrior species had finally learned to read the fine print on humanity's service record, and what they found there was considerably more concerning than anyone had expected. As Vex often told new instructors, never, ever assume the quiet ones are harmless. Sometimes they are just waiting for you to give them a reason to stop being quiet. And sometimes, that reason came with enough force to rearrange your skeleton.